Hello, everyone. Welcome to AG Triathlon for a Meet the Athlete episode today. I have with me Matt Kerr, who is the 2021 AG Ironman World Champion. Hi, Matt. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you, and good to be on, and pleasure, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, so a couple of days ago, you became the Ironman World Champion in the overall age group field. What I would like to do today is to get to know you a bit better, talk about your life, and see how you balance your profession with top performance in triathlon, and just share some insights as to what it takes to become world champion. So how about you tell us a bit about yourself, where you live, what you work, and how you do everything.
Awesome, mate. Yeah, no, cool. I'm from New Zealand, born in New Zealand, and spend most of my time living there throughout the year. I guess most recently I've spent a bit of time in Australia as well, so flicking between New Zealand and Australia, and predominantly that for the climate and the training and the life over there. Through our winter months in New Zealand can get pretty miserable in terms of weather, so the lifestyle, also beyond triathlon and training, is pretty desirable. So months there and through our winter months is fantastic. In terms of professional sort of career capacity, I'm a school teacher, high school teacher, secondary, and specialise in physical education applications. So that's where I've sort of come out of school, qualified, and started my work career. I guess most recently, that's moved into a part-time position, but I'm still teaching on a weekly basis, both in Australia and New Zealand. And balancing that with triathlon is something that that's my current stint at the moment.
Perfect. So tell us a bit about your history in the sport.
Yeah, pretty limited, to be honest. Pretty limited, but that's cool. So I guess coming out of school, I played water polo competitively, so that's where the swimming came from, and surf lifesaving as well. So it's as I say, that's where the swimming came. I could run, but competitively, not so much. Enough to get out there and have a good crack. In terms of riding, that was a new component for me. I'd never on a bike before, never ridden a road bike, and to be honest, that was all learning right from the get go. I did my first 70.3 in 2018, and from that end of 2018. Moved into a full distance Ironman in 2019 stuff, New Zealand Ironman. So that sort of kicked things off, and sort of I guess started the passion for learning and the journey of how can I get better through each session, each race, and as an overall person and athlete.
So you took up the sport in 2018 was your first 70.3, so I'm guessing either 2018 or 2017.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of, I had a bike. I'd done a bit of training on it, but to be honest, it was turn up and we'll give this thing a go, see how it goes. From that race, which was December 18. We actually put some intentional training into getting to an Ironman in March 2019. So,
Nice. So at what point do you find out, or do you realize that you're quite good at this, and then you can get to the top of our sport?
I guess for me it was more about the personal learning and achievements, and actually being better than what I was yesterday or last race or last training session, and that might not have been visible there, and it might have been a long-term step back and look at how have I progressed, and to be honest, the racing was the cherry on the top of that final execution. But like I went into that 70.3 in 2018, and I think I went 426. And at that point, it was, I wouldn't say I was hooked, but it was definitely an inquisitive feel of what happens if we do this, and this. And then you go and execute that, and you do that race again. And then you look at other areas of which you can change or just have a different training load and what impact that could have. And I think that is, for me, the satisfaction I get out of what I do is being able to experiment, execute, and just see how far I can push myself and how far I can really get.
Yeah, so you start off with a 426 70.3, right, which is quite good. I mean, it's not maybe the fastest, but I mean, I guess dependent on the course, it's very good, right? So then you tell yourself, okay, I'm going to dedicate myself to this. Let's see what can be done. Do you surround yourself with a coach? Are you part of a club? Like, how do you then approach training?
Yeah, good question. It's a real good point, and I was pretty isolated in where I was living. I was living sort of coastal / rural, so getting into a club wasn't going to work for me. I do work with a coach, and that coach has seen me through the journey the entire way up until this day, and we work very well together. And I think what helps me from his perspective, not only the knowledge that he applies specifically to swim and run, is his belief in what I do. And I think that is huge as an athlete, is having that backing of someone that truly believes you can do what you can do or be better than you can be, because it's massive to have that. So for me, training was very much individualized and solo. Sure, there was times where I'd jump in with a group and we'd have a bunch ride or whatever it may look like. But for pretty much a lot of it was solo training, and I think there's some pluses, some huge pluses to that, but there can be some pluses and minuses. But and likewise swings the other way. If I was to go into a squad or a group and do all of my training with a club or with other people, that can be pretty dangerous as well. So I think it's nice to have a fine balance between the two. Yeah.
And at what point do you decide that you want to focus on Ironman distance? I mean, it's not so evident that after your first 70.3, what was it, 3 months later, you're going to do an Ironman. So how did you reach that decision? Was it something that you decided with your coach together, or it was more like you telling your coach, hey, I want to do Ironman?
Like the 70.3 distance and the Ironman distance is certainly two that, like, quite frankly, is targeting. It's I mean, they're very different, but I guess for this year specifically, it's more Ironman, given we've got two world champs in the 1 year. So it's a pretty cool opportunity to do. But like, I don't shy away from the 70.3s either, and if there's a race there, then I'll certainly do it. But I guess the approach that we took around also the fueling strategy and becoming as efficient as possible around fat oxidation, and that whole journey speaks exactly to long distance triathlon as such, or long distance racing, whether that's ultras or endurance events. So the two kind of complemented each other around what we were doing, trying to bring that fat oxidation stuff up and being around that lower carbohydrate athlete. And yeah, so it's, I guess, naturally in the fluid path that we both went down, and he's a huge advocate for that. And I adopted it, and it worked, and we saw progress, and we carried on. So.
Fantastic. So you talk about fat oxidation. So I think I'm familiar with the concept, but tell us a bit about that, like what the benefits of that method or approach are, and also what are like the specific workouts that you would do for that?
Yeah, right. Okay, so I guess specifically, let's talk about, say, your your Ironman, which is, it's between sort of, let's say, for an age for 8+ hours, right? And it's having enough fuel to be able to sustain an energy output that is consistent enough to get you through that event, whether you're doing it in 8 hours or whether you're doing it in 12 or 14 or 15, at an intensity level that is not significantly or steadily dropping, which is what we typically see in some of the age group field, is that it's 180k on the bike or the 30k in the run, and all of a sudden we run out of fuel and bonk and end up walking the last part of the marathon. Well, yeah, it's just the case, and it's probably not the best day out for any athlete. So I think having the ability to be able to have the knowledge of how to get through that and fuel correctly and use the body's energy source to be able to sustain a power or pace through that 8 to whatever window of exercise, and come home feeling pretty good and, relatively good given what you've just done, and not be walking the last part of the marathon was a huge plus. So a lot of it was around complementing my training and my diet together, and reducing or being on a lower carbohydrate diet, and the training to complement that around lower intensity trainings sessions. So it's not always going into that grey zone, or it's not always high intensity sessions, or you don't have to come out sore out of every session, and just trying to build that aerobic capacity whereby you're actually using fat as a fuel source rather than glycogen or glucose, because there's only so much of that we've got, and once we're out of that we can replenish it, which is fine, but there's only we get to a certain point whereby the body cannot synthesize that fuel and turn it into energy as quickly as we need on the race course from a gel packet.
Right. So I go for a 3-hour ride, and then I come back and I want to eat everything, including the kitchen sink. But at that point, you don't have high carbs, or what? Like what would you substitute carbs?
Yeah. Right.
By?
Okay. So question. So I guess across the course of a week, I would have specific training sessions that would be, let's say, the longer sessions, like a long run or a long ride. I typically wouldn't have any fuel before that, so they would be fasted sessions, and probably an element of that would be completely fasted, whereby you wouldn't be consuming anything. The depletion of energy that is going in has been limited, therefore your body has to find energy from somewhere. If you're not putting it in via carbohydrates, then it looks elsewhere and finds fat as a fuel source and starts to burn fat. But to be able to access that is the barrier to being able to use that as a fuel source as such. So the more that it's done, the better the body gets, essentially, of using that as a fuel source. But it's not, I guess it's not really about what you're consuming afterwards. Well, that's the whole picture, but it's also what you put in beforehand as well. And during, obviously.
Right, and you think that this was this approach was a significant part of your training from the early days?
Oh, absolutely. Yep, absolutely. I mean, I started oxidizing 1.2 grams of fat, or actually, sorry, 0.5 grams of fat with a fat max of, I think it was about 240. And 18 months later, I'm now oxidizing 1.8 grams of fat per minute at 320 watts, a fat max of 320 watts. So in terms of numbers and lab stuff, like, that's there, and that gives me confidence that using that as a fuel source, and it's a fuel that's going to get me through or see me through the duration of what I need to, if I stay within those ranges of intensity and out that the body's sort of asking, whether it's on the bike or the run.
Nice. So I'll start fasting before my workouts, and I'll become Ironman world champion as well. Sounds good enough. Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, thanks for sharing that with us. I find that quite fascinating, actually. So that's awesome. And yeah, maybe to conclude the call, talk to us about what your what a day for you, day in the life would typically look like for you. Also, how much time would you typically train in a week? Swim, bike, run?
Yeah, like for me, having the balance of some sort of work going on in life is important as well. It's pretty easy to get, to get pulled out by just swim, bike, and run, and that's all you do. Hence why I've continued to work through this time. So I'm probably working average 3 days a week, teaching, and those are typically tend to be my lighter days. And they might still be key sessions, but they're not high volume days as such. And that just gives the opportunity to sort of stay in a professional work environment, turn up to work, have professional conversations, and sort of be responsible for something in someone else's environment, which I think is also pretty important at this point in time of still being in that age group field. Training wise, it's probably for me, if we're talking Ironman, it's going to be between 27 to 30 odd hours a week. That's spread across swim, bike, run, and even so, the blocks whereby we're not as close to a race, we're still getting up there in hours, and I, a lot of athletes could turn around and say, well, I'm only training 20, I'm only training whatever it is, age group, could be 14 hours, 12 hours. I thrive off the fact of doing a higher volume training. I do enjoy it. I enjoy training. I mean, if there wasn't race, probably still be training. And it just depends on the athlete. So I don't think that there's a certain amount of hours that need to be, a bit of a benchmark or for anyone to aim for, but it certainly depends on the individual and also what's going on in their life as well. And as I say, I enjoy training and it's good fun to get out there and be amongst it.
Yeah, I mean, we do it because we love it, right?
Yeah.
What about the rest of the season? So now you're Ironman world champion, but you will have to defend again in, what is it, 4 or 5 months. So how are you going to go into that?
Yeah, it's, you sort of get through the race, and it's all good and well, and then automatically you start to find yourself thinking about what's next, and that starts to become a pretty deep thought process. Not that you haven't had that thought before, but it's definitely it's put on the back burner as you head into a world championship. So it's I mean, we're 3 days out of the race now, and I've sort of got a pretty clear idea of what next few months look like, and especially in Kona. That's the big one next for me. I'm back to New Zealand for a little bit after this, and then head into Australia, and probably head up into Cairns, Ironman Cairns, if not 70.3 Cairns. So that's the start of June, and then we're down in Australia for a few months and just get some solid, consistent training with some intentional, practice behind it. Leading into August, we'll see how we're going there, but there's a couple of options late August to head out of Australia and race. Then come September, we'll make a move over to looking at Maui, going into Maui and spending sort of 4 weeks there pre-Kona, and training over there with a little bit of hopping across to Kona, and being as prepared as possible for an early Kona race in October. So I guess up until October, that's sort of roughly what the year looks like at this point. But it's quite good to have this time over the last sort of 3-4 days to settle down from the race and soak it all in. I mean, it's fantastic that it's occurred and that happened, which is cool. And you got to I think it's really important to recognise that and take that as a win. But also at the same time, you can't sit there for too long because we've got to start again, and there's new goals coming up and changing the process for that. So that's what it's about at the moment.
Yeah, excellent. Definitely. I asked the question out of curiosity, not to take away from your victory or make you start thinking about training or racing, of course. Yeah, Matt, enjoy your victory. I think you're still in LA, so have a safe flight home. Thanks a lot for being on the podcast and sharing your insights. I've learned something today, so great chatting with you, and all the best for the rest of the season, and see you in Kona.
Awesome, mate. Hey, thank you again, and we'll see you early October.
Cheers. Talk to you later.